Hi everyone! In this video I'm going to be talking a bit about my painting process using watercolor and a lot of the different techniques that I use. I'll be showing you guys a sped up video that is 4 times the actual speed that I paint at. Wish I painted that fast. And this is a video of me painting the Dracophant, which is the dragon elephant, face. There are a lot of different techniques you can use with watercolor. Some artists prefer to mix all of their colors ahead of time, and I like to let my colors blend on the creatures that I'm painting. So the first thing I do is create shadows using a fairly small brush. See, I've got a finished pencil drawing and I'm just adding shadows with, this is a color called Moon Glow. It's from the Daniel Smith watercolor line. It's kind of a gray purple color with a little bit of blue in it, and it works really well for adding shadows. And then while that's still wet, I'm blending in some olive green all on the front of our Dracophant. And then you're going to see me add some brighter green. It's like a yellow green. I believe that is a Koi watercolor. I wish I painted this fast in real life, but I paint 4 times slower than this. So what I do is, while things are still wet, I'll tend to add multiple colors and let them blend together and have what they call happy accidents on the paper. You'll see me working on a number of different greens. I've got some indigo blue in there, and later I'll be adding some sepia and some burnt umber, which are browns. I also use some gray, though I tend to use gray and black very sparingly because paintings come out a lot more vibrant when you use colors. So I believe the gray that I'm using here is graphite gray. It's the same color gray that the graphite in pencil lead is, and that's another Daniel Smith color. So once I have done my base colors on the area that I'm painting and let them dry, then I go to a much smaller brush and I start outlining all of the details. I'm using more of the same colors here. I'm just starting to pop those out. So my first pass is lighter colors that end up getting blended together because I'm painting when they're really wet. That dries completely, and then this pass is all adding detail with a very small brush. And you'll see sometimes the color will be too dark, and I'll just blend it out with some more water. But I'm looking to pop out areas and really bring this to life using light and shadow. And a lot of knowing where shadows should be is practice. If you have never painted the particular creature you're painting before, I've done a number of elephant and obviously a lot of dragon creatures. But if you don't know how the lighting should fall on a dragon's face or your creature's face, you can look up photos of all kinds of lizards and things like that, or even get a model of an animal, dragon, lizard, elephant, or even a different animal, and just see what the light hits in different ways on it. And the type of the skin of the creature is going to have an effect of the lighting too. Is it scaly? Is it shiny? So you can, with the wonders of the internet, Google things like scales or look at photos of elephant skin, kind of see what the lighting does. So now you're going to see me introduce brown into the kind of the mix of colors that I'm using. The more red brown I'm using is called burnt umber, and the darker brown you're seeing me outline things with is called sepia. I also use sepia ink on a lot of my paintings. You'll notice I never outline things completely. I tend to outline them where I want them to pop out more and then blend that color into the painting a bit. I think it's important to pop out the details, but at the same time, if you outline everything completely, it tends to make your creature look too flat. And with watercolor, as I've talked about, basically where you have wet paint or wet paper, so you can just wet it with water if you want to, and you add color, the colors are going to run and bleed together. So this is great for creating a lot of the blended colors that you start out with on a picture. And then the details are done once those are dry on top of that, and they don't blend in because the paint is dry. So it's important to let it dry completely when you're adding different layers of shadows and details. And you can lift paint back out with watercolor, but it's hard to lift out completely. You can also fix it with white ink or white paint, but it's better to try to leave your lighter areas. So I always start pretty light and then slowly work my way darker, adding more shadows. And watercolor tends to dry lighter than it is when you first apply it when it's wet. So I'll usually see how it looks and then keep darkening it as needed. And I don't sketch out every single tiny detail on my pencil. I'll usually have the shapes and some of the details. It depends on the creature. But I love to just have things happen naturally as I'm painting. I love a very natural look. I found that the more exact and tight I am with paintings, the less people like them. And to have a sort of natural look where your colors bleed together and create those happy little accidents is part of the wonder of watercolor. It's a balance of finding the control to get the picture you want, but the happy accidents to create something that's maybe not quite what you had planned, but probably better. And new watercolor artists often find that challenging, especially if they're coming from other mediums like ink or pencil, where you might be being very, very exact. It can be scary to let things bleed together, but it's totally worth it. And the thing I tell people the most when they're learning watercolor is just to relax and have fun. You should be enjoying the process. And most of the problems people have in paintings with things looking like they aren't natural, like they're streaky in a bad way, or the lines don't look good, is because they're so worried about getting it right that they're very tense when they're painting. So it's important to relax. And you'll notice when I'm painting, there's different ways that I'm holding the brush. So when I'm doing bigger areas where the colors are blending together, like you just saw me doing there, I actually hold the brush pretty far back. This lets you do sort of wider strokes, and they're not as controlled, which is really great for big areas and just generally blocking things in. And then when you see me do details, you'll see that I hold the brush a lot closer to the tip of the brush. And my hand is usually planted on the paper itself, which lets me have a lot of control when it comes to adding those fine details. And if you're worried about smudging your painting, obviously you want to let it dry, but if you're worried about smudging even the pencil, or you're just a messy person, your paint always gets on your hands, you can always put scrap paper or cloth under your hand while you're painting. And I'm just showing you guys the face of the creature. Sometimes I do totally paint this way, where I do the entire face first and then the rest of the creature, but a lot of the time I'll kind of work the whole painting at once. So here we're looking at the last step I do, which is using white acrylic ink. This is essentially like very liquid white paint that is waterproof and smudge proof once it dries. This lets me put in those highlights that really pop out the creature. And the problem with white watercolor is it's just not white enough. When you water it down to get it to paint smoothly, it just ends up being too thin. You'd have to put a lot of coats on. But white acrylic ink works really, really well for this. I know people who just use acrylic paint as well. And you want to make sure, tip I learned early on, that you always use titanium white. Whatever paint or ink, that color should be titanium white. Don't use China white. China white comes in a lot of sets of paint, but it will not get you a bright white. It'll look bright white when you paint it, and then as it dries, it will yellow. So you really want to be sure you're using the right colors. And if you're new to watercolor, definitely test out your colors on separate pieces of paper first, let them dry, and see how they look before you go to town on a painting like this. So that's about it. You're just going to see me finish up the highlights. Thanks for watching. And this video is all sponsored by subscribers to my Patreon, which is patreon.artlair.com. And they get to see this video first, and then eventually it'll be released to the public. And I hope you enjoy it. And really big thanks to all the folks who subscribed. We're about to put them on the screen. And thanks for making all of this possible.